Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for everyone who has joined.
Webinario organizado.
Welcome to this first webinar organized by the South American chapter of Obreal Global. This webinar is called, actually the goal, let's say, is to present a series of data and to talk about different approaches on internationalization of the curricula and digitalization in South America. This is the result of a long journey and a lot of efforts and joint work conducted by the partners of the South American chapter of Obreal Global. So for participants, for the colleagues who are currently watching us and listening to us, some logistics. Then I will make a brief introduction for the webinar and to introduce the participants as well. The webinar has interpretation services, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So for those who want to listen to English, Spanish, or Portuguese, at the bottom of your screens, you will find an icon where you can choose the language that you prefer. I would also like to remind you that the chat box will be off and that the comments or any comments or questions you may want to do or pose to the speakers, you can do so by writing on the Q&A. There is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screens as well. This is the first webinar of a series of webinars whose goal is to consolidate the collective work that we've been conducting. I mean, all the members of the South American chapter of Obreal Global. It is divided in two parts. One part that is data collection, and then collective and regional debate or discussion about priorities in terms of higher education. So the South American chapter of Obreal Global is made by a group of associations of higher education of South America and some of the organizations of the Education Council, always talking about the South American chapter. So this chapter of Obreal Global is presided over or led by the Montevideo group, and we have Álvaro Maglia representing this group, as well as by the Colombian Association of Universities. Oscar Dominguez, its director, is joining us today as well. The South American chapter also has a small management structure located in Mar del Plata University, led by Daniel Antenucci, who is the Vice Rector of the National University of Mar del Plata. He's here as well, and he will be in charge of making the general presentation of all the results of this study. We also have, and I do thank you indeed for your presence, we have Francisco Allarcon, the Director, the Deputy Secretary General of the Central American Higher University Council, and Michael Gabel, the Director of Higher Education Policy Unit of the European University Association. Many of us are working with them jointly as well. So just to wrap up by means of introduction, the goals for today are to show and to discuss the data, and maybe the most important part is to share the work that we've conducted in Obreal Global. It was collective. It was a collective work that implied, first, sharing or reaching consensus in choosing the priority topics that we were going to address by all the participants from the different countries in South America: Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. Mexico actually joined us for this project. So the selection of topics that were important or a priority for the South American universities did not only call for debate or discussion, but also for the creation of data addressing this problem. And the university associations or member of the South American chapter created a joint methodology so as to gather those data and to have a pilot, like a test, of how this collection of data might help in understanding the general trends for the internationalization of the curricula and the digitalization of education. So the difference between our approach and our approach is, I mean, there are other approaches as well for this same issue, but all of them, I would say that all of them are focused in consensus. In our case, it was reached by consensus. It was not proposed or suggested by anyone from outside or by anyone with a global vision. No. In this case, part of the articulation and the work of our university associations, locally and regionally, that they actually made a great effort to have a vision that represents the region. So this idea is something that really becomes increasingly more important. So we would like to help to share this kind of regional vision about the problem of internationalization and digitalization. Even more important than this is to support the regional work so as to create joint efforts of data collection, because this will also help all the universities, not only at the level of articulating the policies, but also nationally, but also at a regional level and the integration levels, together with the inter-regional dialogue that this webinar wants to foster with the participation of our colleagues from abroad. So this was just a kind of brief introduction. I want to thank all of you because I know that everyone has worked so much, all the speakers, all the participants. I think there were 7 or 8 focus groups covering Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Peru, and Mexico. We've worked for free, which is something that is really important to point out. So I thank you indeed for all of that. So in order to start, I will ask the chair of the South American chapter, Álvaro Maglia, Oscar Dominguez. You have the floor to start with the organization, and then we'll give the floor to Daniel Antenucci so that he can present the trends, the general trends, and finally we'll give the floor to Francisco Allarcon and Michael Gabel so that they can give us a vision of Central America and of Europe about the study on the one hand and about the issues or the problems that take place in their own regions. And finally we'll have a little bit of space for some more debate or Q&A. Thank you all again. Alvaro, I give the floor to you, and I will share a PowerPoint in the meantime that Alvaro and Oscar will present. Okay, can you hear me okay? Yes, Alvaro, go ahead. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, actually, depending on where you are located. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this webinar. As a matter of fact, it is the first cornerstone that we've achieved after all the work that we've conducted in the South American chapter and beyond. I would say beyond South America, because it also includes North America with Mexico and other colleagues from abroad as well. So this shows some of the guidelines that we were mentioning, how each region focuses on the necessary elements for each region, but to articulate that vision with other regions where we can share knowledge, where we can train each other, where we can find our points of strength to be able to support some processes that we need to develop further on. In that sense, the South American chapter that we are coordinating here, I mean, we are two associations. It's an international network on the one hand, such as the UTM, and an association of universities, such as ASCUM from Colombia, and other universities, Daniel, Julio, I can see you here, Daniel Antenucci, Julio Taylor, Chile, Brazil, you also cooperated with all our work. So these are our universities. They are the ones participating here. It's not just groups of like associations of universities, but universities themselves. The idea is to make it as wide as possible or as encompassing as possible for universities to participate. These are tasks that might be difficult in certain aspects, but as we move on, we feel very content, very satisfied that we can actually meet these goals. I would therefore like to tell you how happy I am to have the EUA and the Central American contributions as well. So to start, let me tell you what we're doing from South America, and then we'll have the vision from other regions. These focus groups where we focused, as a matter of fact, for this webinar, and where that gave us the findings that we have, we're focused exactly on that, on getting information so that we would be able to rethink or to reflect, maybe a continuous reflection. It's not only rethinking, but to continue thinking about what our universities do. With no information, there is no way to provide the adequate answers or responses that we need. And I think that that's the main spirit of it. And it has fostered us to, encouraged us to move in this direction, as well as to start analyzing other instances, working together with Obriel Global. We are all part of the global network, and we are advancing so that we can gather these data that might be interesting and relevant for all of us. The university networks and other wider spaces might also need this information. So I think that we need to contribute with the data from our region, as well as to encourage other instances that might have a broader look from the whole of the Americas, or even from an international or a global perspective as well. So we have some previous experiences. I believe that in the current stage, we can't forget the Alpha Puentes project, which enabled us to start talking from one region to the other, intercontinental analyses or like dialogues between one continent and the other that already took place, and that enabled us to create more information. We cannot forget about the survey on Latin American education conducted by Tresal as well. It was back then in 2014 that gave us information about the trends of higher education. I don't want to continue talking so much. Oscar is much more organized as a speaker than myself. So I will actually give the floor to him so that he can continue supporting and giving more information. Thank you indeed.
Alvaro, thank you so much. Thank you all, Ramon. Thank you all for organizing this. all the colleagues who are here with us, especially you, Daniel, who will be updating us on this big study, and Julio also, who's always been organizing all of these. So, and of course, thank you so much, Michael Guerrero and Francisco, who will be here with us. So Francisco, just 30 seconds to especially thank all of those who have expressed about the situation, the difficult situation in Colombia. And I am mentioning this today because most of the social protests we are seeing in our country are affecting higher education, but also every Latin American student, and in Colombia and in the entire region, who are not part of the system. For many decades, unfortunately, they have been left aside of our projects of access to formal education. And unfortunately, now they are these, they call them kids who don't study, who don't work, and it's very difficult for them to thrive in our countries, especially in Colombia. The results have been quite complex in our country. So it was already a very difficult situation because of the pandemic, where in many spaces where we have met, we have discussed the problems that the economic crisis will bring to our situation, our nations. The current situation in Colombia, um, in many cases, that in many cases has to do with all these young people who do not see a future, is quite sad. We're seeing a terrible situation, of course, but of course we want to be optimistic, and at least those who work in higher education, we know that these we will have to overcome this as many other events in our lives. So thank you everyone who have expressed their solidarity with Colombia. Now, I would like to say, after what Alvaro and Nicolas said, that we have had a sort of agreement so that in the next 2 years, Nico, we will be able to work with ASCUM, yeah, AUGM, in this tradition we have had, because Argentina in Mar del Plata and Colombia with Bogota, we can have this sort of coordination with Boreal Global so that the South American chapter can move on. And Nico, this leads us to what might be the issue we are working with right now. We've had a precedent of the role of the associations and the elements of these associations and universities. As Alvaro was telling us, they have meant a precedent in the over 60 years of what our organizations represent throughout the institutional life of South America, talking about our particular institutions. But the big contributions from South America for the creation of these three big conventions in Cuba, Cartagena, and now Cordoba, because of the 100 years of the university autonomy in Cordoba, Argentina, they have come to show that the plans to mold public policy in education in South America, it has worked. So South America has made very strong contributions in the world, in the two world summits in Paris, and we know that the next challenge is coming now for Barcelona 2022, and this goes to show the role of institutions by gathering opinions, by reaching consensus, and trying to set posture in South America about this issue. The second element is the role of the South American chapter of Boreal Global with the internationalization and digitalization. I'm not going to talk about that because we have someone here who will be giving us all of the elements. Daniel has great information he will be presenting today, but I would just like to point out the ability to develop high impact initiatives when the associations and institutions from different countries collaborate, we can do things like the ones we did so fast, including those countries you are seeing on the screen right now, Brazil and Colombia, and then Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Peru, and Mexico. It was a lot of work, very intense work, and we will be presenting the results of the South American chapter on this webinar. So, and of course, the possibilities to generate data and detecting trends are there. And these spaces have allowed us to make an impact that's evident. For example, with the Ulysses project, the entire project of the relationship with the world of the universities, the Caminos project, and everything we're doing now with the research project after this new overall bet. This shows that we can do great work that can make an impact and generate trends for the future of higher education. And of course, as Alvaro said, now I would like to use the experiences we developed through the Triasal poll or survey, which now allow us to say that the South American chapter is making a huge bet. And it's not just about South America, sorry. We want to work now with traditional partners that South America has had. I'm talking about Mexico, Central American, the Union of Universities in the Caribbean, these close partners we have worked with and work that we have still to develop, but they are all part of a region that have a work dynamic with a whole lot of history and a big desire to keep on growing. So thank you, everyone. A big hug to you all. Thank you, Oscar, and thank you, Alvaro, for this general framework and sharing the history of where all of this is coming from. Before moving on to Daniela and the study, I would just like to add two things about the work that has been done and that will be done, that Alvaro and you were kind enough not to mention. The South American chapter of Obreal, and especially Ascun and all of them, actually, thank you so much, Anuyes and the Universidad Veracruzana from Mexico. If we talk, when we talk about different universities and levels, because Alvaro was saying this is not coming just from the upper part to the bottom, because this goes from the bottom up as well. When we talk about internationalization of the curricula and the digitalization. So we will be opening with this data, but we will also be offering in the next 2 weeks to a group of South American and Latin American universities 2 workshops, hands-on workshops about COI that will be presented by the Universidad Veracruzana, and they will have the support of Universidad Colombiana and University College in Cork, Ireland. And then we will have a general discussion along with colleagues from India, South Africa, and with the new president of Hawaii, Brazil, about the future of the internationalization. So everything that Danielle will be presenting now has to do with a bigger mission of Obrea Global and especially its South American chapter. And as Oscar was saying, it's about reaching consensus on the regional issues and boosting interregional dialogue, and also offering possibilities for training and developing the universities in the region. So after this 22-minute introduction by Alvaro, Oscar, and me, now we will go to what really matters. And so we will listen to Daniel and his introduction, his data, and the trends they have detected about the internationalization of the curricula and the digitalization. And also he will tell us how a group of people and very different stakeholders managed to agree on a methodology that was accepted, agreed, and validated by the different universities, associations, and President's Council, and this was implemented in a focus group in different countries in South America. And the data were articulated, so these are clean data now. So Daniel, we will listen to you and then the rest of the comments. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here representing LINED, the Lab for the Internationalization of Education, that has performed a comparative analysis about the data that have been gathered. First of all, I would like to greet everyone here. It's wonderful to share this space with you, and we would like to express our solidarity with the people of Colombia, our brothers. Now, with regards to what brought us here, this study, which is based on detecting trends and opportunities in the virtualization and internationalization of the curricula, as I said, we performed an analysis at the at LINED, the Lab for Internationalization of Education, especially by Jimena Estrella, Shamila Silva Peralta, Margarita Guarin, and they have all been working here, gathering the data, doing the identification, the analysis, and the systematization of the data I will be presenting. Now I'm going to share the presentation with you, if I can find it, of course. Here it is. Okay. The focus groups on the South American chapter of Overall Global, they were carried out between January and May 2021, as Nicolas said, and we identified, we had several countries that were identified through networks, and they established a common policy, selecting particular topics and themes that are regional themes that we consider a priority and that have to do specifically with the virtualization and the internationalization of the curriculum. I should clarify here that the need of regional integration in this kind of information and knowledge is a priority to generate educational policies at a regional level. And what Overall Global is doing through its South American chapter is facilitating an articulation, a horizontal and participatory integration that will allow for the consensus of a common homogeneous strategy about our most complicated issues. And with that in mind, the role of the associations of universities through their particular networks is fundamental for this kind of planning and selection. The planification and the coordination was led to the focus group strategy, because we understood that nowadays it's a tool that generates better and more focused information compared to the dispersion that might be generated by a poll. So we thought that it could be a better tool using these focus groups. We agreed on a model of questions for each group. They were semi-structured and a general systematic approach, as I said several times, and the internationalization of the curriculums. On each country, the coordination was in charge of contacts from each university. They would depend on each country or group of countries, and we agreed on a format for the presentation of the results, which facilitate a common analysis. Having the same variable on a common platform allows for better focusing on the kind of data and the results. Now, with regards to the selection of the participants, we included several countries in the region, but not only that, the selection of participants had to do with trying to find more and more variations so that we would see a big picture of the reality of the issues and expectations in the region. So with that in mind, we chose big and small universities from different regions, both public and private universities that have different biases in different countries. And of course, they have different degrees of importance in several countries. But the idea here was to gather the greatest amount of variability as possible. We wanted a varied sample. We also tried to reach different stakeholders of these higher education institutions. They have to do with areas that are they are all part of the internationalization of education in a region, but these areas have to do with the offices of international relations, but also the academic areas that have a fundamental importance when it comes to the internationalization of the curriculum and their link with technological structures to virtualize our universities. The data analysis was carried out through descriptive content and the creation of empirical categories. So basically, it was based on a qualitative analysis of the discourse that allowed us to establish separate groups of categories with semantic concepts that were addressed in the study. The methodology included the countries you can see on the table here, and this is the amount of focus groups. And this was done in individual countries or regions. For example, the case of Argentina and Uruguay. There we carried out 3 focus groups on the dates you can see there with 11 institutions in Brazil, with 2 focus groups and 10 institutions, Chile, 2 and 3, Colombia, together 2 groups, 6 institutions, and Mexico with 11 institutions and 2 focus groups. So we have a total of 11 focus groups, 41 institutions, 51 heads of internationalization offices, and 36 heads of academic offices. As I said, the sampling represented the areas that are more linked to what we were studying. They are not the only ones, but because of our methodology and strategy, we try to focus on the main stakeholders. Now, with regards to the distribution of the categories, considering the country, we can say that we assessed 183 keywords, and they were categorized, as you can see here, on this horizontal graph. where in blue, you can see those that have to do with the internationalization of the curriculum. And then in orange, I'm sorry, I don't have great eyesight. I'm sorry if I make an error with the colors, but well, in orange, you will see of those that have to do with virtualization. And then we have groups of terms that were more important, and sometimes they matched in both spheres, internationalization and virtualization, as is the case of training, where in the case of in the group of the internationalization, the group of keywords for the internationalization of the curricula design that you can see in light blue has quite a strong relative weight in all institutions. And when it comes to virtualization, the one that was most important for those who were part of the focus groups is the virtual offer. There's a bias in Brazil, of course, because Brazil did not address the focus group of the internationalization of the curriculum, and they did address virtualization. But we can see it in all the groups, what the relative importance is of training, designing the curriculum, in the case of the internationalization of the curriculum, and then training in the case of the offer and the perceptions or emotions in the case of virtualization. So when we talk about the category of training in the case of internationalization of the curriculum, the bigger or more mentioned terms, you can see them on the presentation. And here in the arrow, you can see the synthesis of this concept or conceptual cloud you can see on the right. And in general, it has to do with the result of the analysis, which is the understanding, the awareness and understanding of the internationalization of curriculum, because it was considered a very heterogeneous concept in our higher education institutions, and it is necessary to clarify it and to align it to the strategic policies of our institutions. You may need a stronger or deeper formalization of the concept of the internationalization of the curriculum, especially for those who are in charge of academic areas that generate educational policies within their academic units in our institutions of higher education. And here we can see the need to obtain competencies that need to be developed through teachers training, as we saw, but they have to do with interculturality, the need of flexibility, the need of innovation about these new perspectives, the use of technological tools, and especially commitment, but institutional commitment of the of our higher institutions, higher education institutions.
Now, in terms of the category that we called training, that is to say, virtual training in this case, we can see that the competencies to be developed by means of teacher training, that comes up as something important out of the analysis of the discourse. And they are mainly related to adaptation, to the responsiveness, the languages, different languages, the technological or digital competencies, and the update of didactic or pedagogical methodologies. And there is also kind of a different approach. This happens in all the different groups, at least in Latin America, because I'm really not sure whether this will have such an impact on different chapters developed by Obriel. Languages might not be so important, but in this case, for us, it is. Now, in terms of the curricula design, which was another of the categories, the results of the analysis show a need for redesign, flexibilization of the models in such a way that it may allow for it to be useful as a link between our different organizations when it comes to organizing the curricula, making students exchanges, then also creating best practices, usually related to the double degrees, COIL, the mirror classes, and the summer schools, and establishing recognition, acknowledgement, incentives from an institutional point of view, that is to say, what we mentioned before, very much related to the commitment. These kind of schemes need a specific articulation of these strategies, as well as a development that implies, because it implies developing institutional indicators that may help us understand how strong these dynamics are. Now, in terms of the category that we called virtual offer, the main model was the hybrid model, or let's call it bimodal, that is to say, creating also flexible programs, because that has, I mean, it's very much related to the internationalization of the curricula, creating online courses, MOOCs, again, as I said before, language courses, something that has an impact of the whole of Latin America, and it has different sides and dimensions to it, as well as the need to create talks or discussions with international peers, having reciprocity. In this strategy, the content needs to be acknowledged, recognized, thus allowing accreditation in our organizations of any course that the students might take or enroll in. Therefore, it is necessary to organize and adapt the regulations, the infrastructure, and at these times of, well, pandemic times or post-pandemic times in the near future, to make an update or an adjustment as well of the digital platforms, sharing maybe some platforms that might go beyond the internal aspects of a single university, because we need things in common for these strategies to work. Now, in terms of the next category called perceptions and emotions, it is not a minor issue, let me say. This represents the experiences that are perceived within our universities and that have to be taken into account, so that those that are negative might have a lower impact on, well, the policies, the experiences as such. Right now, this is very important because of the effect, the impact that the pandemic has on the way in which we work, the way we teach. For many higher education institutions, they are undergoing a transition. So they are kind of forced to reorganize themselves with these new competencies. And we need training for teachers, for everyone involved, as a matter of fact. That leads us to a digital cultural transformation. the need for that transformation, to accept and to deal with uncertainty, which should be a common skill, or let's say one of the priority skills of anyone who is graduating from a higher education university nowadays. It implies knowing how to deal or tackle a scenario of uncertainty. Also, how to reduce the resistance to change, how to deal with fear, how to organize mechanisms in order to reduce the difficulties of connectivity and accessibility, the digital gap or digital divide, which is so important. As a matter of fact, in the UNESCO 2019 study, they established that there were great digital gaps in our region. In particular, some countries, for example, in Latin America, have between 60 and 70% of access to internet, while in other countries of Latin America, it's not only South America, it doesn't matter, they are in different regions as well, they only have 30% of access to these kind of platforms or connectivity. And not only that, the digital divide within the countries as well. For example, the metropolitan regions and the more rural areas of a single country that can go from 41 to 36%, while in other countries that difference is only between 13 to 20%, according to the ECLAC report of 2016. So perceptions and emotions are important indeed. It is important to know where we are located and where we are standing so that we can organize our work in such a way that the emotional impact will be lower, and people from international relations and from the academic areas, the whole of the academic community, should pay attention to this aspect as well. Now, in terms of the trends and opportunities, the general trends and opportunities, as you can see, they are gathered by countries or groups of countries. In the first group, that includes 6 countries, you can see that it is necessary to raise awareness about internationalization of the curriculum, because there is incipient and confused knowledge about it. I said this before, there is also a need to include this internationalization of the curriculum to strategic plans of higher education institutions. The commitment of authorities, teachers, and managers to foster this process and to tackle or to balance the asymmetries between disciplines and departments or universities. It's kind of establishing a balance, we should call it, between acceptance and resistance. Now, other groups that, it's the same countries, but you will see that they are grouped differently. The need to create measurements of internationalization of the curriculum, which disciplines it is included, which institutions are included, the impact on the training. And it is also necessary, therefore, to have acknowledgement and incentives. Then we have 5 more countries or institutions of 5 more countries that show the need to systematize previous experiences in terms of double degrees, foreign languages, the mirror classes, summer schools, visiting teachers. So we need a lot of information there in order to establish different kind of previous experiences. What we could also see in 4 countries, the need to establish international synergy. There is a priority interest for this in Latin America, secondarily in Europe. and the need as well to consolidate regional programs and virtual exchanges. We have some of them like PILA, UDUAL, AUGM, AUIP, INILAT, ODUCAL, Red LATAM, COIL, Columbus, OUI, etc. And also, as we said before, in Europe, there are programs like Erasmus Plus, and in North America as well, they also showed interest in this regard. Now, in other higher education institutions in other countries, there is a promotion of competency-based curricular models. It is very important to move from education based on content, because now there are our landscape is changing so much, our environment is changing so frequently that we will need to make a redesign so that the curriculums will deal with competencies rather than with contents. This also implies redesigning or applying flexibility to the educational models, and teacher training, of course, and managers training as well in all these different topics. Development of competencies, as we said before, in the clouds, in the conceptual clouds, related to collaborative work, interculturality, global thinking, global citizenship as well, with the current perspectives of the world, the comprehensive communication skills, pedagogical innovation, and then IT, computer and language skills. Now, in terms of virtualization, what we can see is that out of the conclusions, trends and opportunities, a transformation of the educational model. That's what we see. The emergence of the hybrid model, the need to relearn by means of these old ways and new ways as well. That is to say, because of the contingencies that we are facing, this has been expanded a lot. We need to design and to plan pedagogical and curricular innovation. There's also a need for teacher training in technical, pedagogical, and language skills. So you see that this appears both in virtualization and in the previous part as well. A lot of topics are overlapping. They are common in our strategies. This need for virtualization opens new perspectives for internationalization, as we've seen since last year, since 2020, and currently as well. So that goes in general terms and for the curriculum in particular. There has been a massive higher education virtualization that should be made the most of, because it will create also the challenge of keeping a virtual offer, an online offer. Those teachers that used to teach face-to-face and now they are teaching online, we need to organize our institutions so that they will not have to duplicate the time, double the time that they are in which they are teaching. So we will need to adjust the teaching contents and the modalities for what's coming next. Something else that we saw, we need to strengthen the infrastructure, the tools and the resources for virtual teaching, search for national, international, governmental and intergovernmental and private alliances so as to facilitate connectivity and accessibility. And this is not something that only applies to our institutions, but also to the governments, to our governments, in terms of working jointly to make access to these technologies more massive. It was very heterogeneous. There were great differences and divides in our countries. There is a need to implement institutional indicators that will measure all of these, making as well a review of the regulations and evaluation processes and getting recognition and certification. Finally, we are planning, or we can see ahead of us, a mass a massive use of higher education virtualization, an almost complete digitalization of our academic offer with online courses, language courses, foreign teachers, and also paying attention to the asymmetries between the disciplines and the departments, acceptance versus resistance, as I said before. So some conclusions to wrap up, the general conclusions of this whole study about the role of the university associations and the university councils. We understand that the role for this kind of analysis, the role of university associations and council has been and continues being crucial for the selection, sampling, and systematic data collection at regional level. Obrial Global fostered this articulated work with a common template so that we could analyze results better. However, we did have some bias when collecting the data, but this is the first time that we were doing such a project. It was very productive to start with. And the work that Obrial has conducted in terms of creating a synergy in this joint and horizontal work is very valuable indeed. They are taking a role that will make our dialogues become easier. That's why we say that it is important to have a common strategy. That is really significant for us. It's a priority when it comes to establishing our policies, and also the importance of expanding the samples and creating documents for regional trends approved by all the university associations of the region that are members of the Obrial South American chapter, because it enables the establishment of regional internationalization policies, and not just to have scattered actions that might go against one another if they do not have enough information or surveys that share this information. So just there is an annex where it shows the universities and the institutions that participated in Argentina and in Uruguay. In this case, you can have access to this report if you want or if you need it, from Brazil, from Chile, from Colombia and Peru, from Mexico. And that's it. So thank you very much. This is the end of the report, of this first report that from LINED I was able to conduct and to make this comparison about the focus groups that were conducted by all the organizations that participate in Obrial Global. So thank you indeed. Thank you, Danielle, for your work, for all the work that has actually facilitated and make our lives easier from now on. And I think that this is the first data collection exercise. And of course, there has to be a bias. It's the first try. But, you know, getting closer to this idea of internationalization of the curriculum, analyzing the need for more training, or realizing the lack of training that we have in terms of teaching, in terms of the need to rethink about internationalization of the curriculums within this context, within the current context. So now we will have the comments on Central America and Europe. So in order to move on, I will give the floor to our next two speakers, but I would like to add a third speaker to it.
I will do this in English. I turn into English so I can welcome Mr. or Miss Clover Hamilton. She is, let me try to upgrade her. There was a connection problem with her, so she will be joining our panel soon. She's representing the Ministry of Education of Jamaica. We have invited the Ministry of Education of Jamaica to try to also have the Caribbean perspective on the problems of internationalization of curricula and digitalization. So Ms. Hamilton probably will be with us. I don't know if she's already in the panel, but while I thank her and the Ministry of Education of Jamaica for kindly join us in this exercise, let me give the floor first, so we can continue in English, to our friend and colleague from the European University Association, Michael Gabel, who will react to your presentation, Daniel, and probably let us know the trends or the main perspectives from Europe first. Then we'll move to Ms. Hamilton, who I am saying right now. So hello, Ms. Hamilton. And then we'll close with you, Francisco, in Spanish. So we keep in English and then we'll go to Spanish. Michael, the floor is yours. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you, Nico. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I have a small problem how to share my presentation here. If you could just...
There is...
I see it now. Yeah, I can see it now. Yeah, good. Can you see that? Not yet?
No, not yet. Now it is starting. Yeah.
Now it's starting. Just
now.
Yeah,
now it's
good.
On.
And it's the right presentation as well. So once again, good afternoon, or better to you, good morning from Brussels, from the EUA. And I'm really delighted to be here with you and also with old friends. I listened to Alvaro and also to Oscar about their reflections on the Alpha Puentes and the Tresal, and I thought it is confirms once more our finding that projects close too early or their assessment closes too early, the impact often comes much later. I also agreed completely with what Oscar and Alvaro said about the importance of molding public policy. And it's really good to know that you make impact here in Latin America, also with regards to Barcelona 22. We are all looking forward to that. For those of you who don't know us, we are the European University Association and a member organization in 48 countries in Europe, so it's broader than the European Union. And we take an active policymaking role in the Bologna process and in EU policymaking as well. And one of the ways of how we do that is, of course, through gathering data from our membership. We do that in a very selective way. I mean, only where we think we have to do that. We do that through surveys, but also through, and that gets me to Daniel's presentations, which I think was a presentation which was very enlightening. We also do that through this kind of focus group and through many other ways, you know. We do that basically either because the data is otherwise not available. That's one point. And sometimes we also do it because data is available, but it does not necessarily take the perspective of the universities. And I think Daniel's presentation reflected that very well. So many of the points that you made, and I was in particular struck by the emotional aspects or the tensions, the problems, the challenges that came up with learning and with digitally enhanced learning and teaching. Often these differentiated look into the institutions, what that means for staff, what that means of different types of staff, what that means for students, and is not fully reflected, let's say, in the data of OECD or of some other also commercial data providers. Quite often, and that brings me to the issue of digitally enhanced learning and teaching, quite often you are confronted with a relatively stereotype view, like universities are resistant to take up digitalization. They don't want to change. And Daniel also reflected on that. But I think everybody who has been working in an institution knows the complexity of this issue, and this is not just about some people who don't want to change. So if we look, we do quite a bit of publications. I posted earlier our website so you can have a look. And we also have some data, quite some data on digitally enhanced learning and teaching. And the first time that we actually gathered longitudinal data through an online questionnaire was in 2014, because you remember that maybe that was the time when the MOOCs came up, and we found out that we had actually no data about MOOCs, first of all, but generally not about what institutions did on digitally enhanced learning and teaching. So we did a first report. And just recently, in 2019, we thought we might do a new report. We looked around and thought, has not anybody else done that? But we found there was literally no other report on higher education institutions with regards to digitally enhanced learning, at least not which would allow to compare data across different institutions and systems across Europe. And this is why we started that. As usual, we put out a survey to institutional leadership, and the data collection took then place in the period of April to June 2020. So you can see the dilemma there. We started our survey basically at the moment when the COVID crisis had just kicked in, and we had actually to tell institutions to report, please, the data as it would have been before the crisis. And we also had then, of course, some dedicated questions on the situation, how it was experienced in these early months during the crisis in the spring of 2020. We had a relatively, for us, this is a relatively good response rate, 360 responses from 48 different countries. 48 covers really all the countries in the European higher education area. I'm going through now just some of the findings. It's not only about internationalization, but puts it in a slightly broader perspective, and will reference on that occasion also some comments to Daniel's report. So, sorry, I have to move that a bit up. So, as I said, it's basically pre-crisis data, and we compared to the situation in 2014. And one thing that we found, and that was a bit astonishing, that we saw that there was no major change regarding the number of institutions that provided blended and online learning. So we found it's about the same number that had blended learning, online learning in place, and also MOOCs. What was a bit interesting, but we didn't ask the question in 2014, that in 2020, every second institution provided also short non-degree courses, which go also under the name micro-credentials. I don't know if you have a similar discussion on micro-credentials here in Latin America as we have in Europe, but in Europe, it's a bit of a hype at the moment. They are highly emphasized by policymakers, and also some institutions are strongly involved in developing them as a very flexible way of providing learning for all kinds of learners. So that's basically the situation. So no big change in the take-up, one could say. But what we found interesting was that it had digital learning and teaching had become so much more strategic and also much more mainstreamed. So it was used at more institutions across Europe. You can see here 57%, more than half of it say they use it across the institution. And if you go to some certain regions in Northern Europe, it's even much higher. And then what we could also see, there has been a growth in institutional strategies for digitally enhanced learning and teaching of more than 20%. And there are also more than 70% which said it has become a strategic priority. And we had some more data which basically confirmed that this is moving towards an institution-wide approach, or at least an approach that is supported by institution-wide coordination and support structures. So in this regard, kind of encouraging. What was also interesting is that we could see how the purpose of digitally enhanced learning and teaching has become a bit clearer than compared to our 2014 survey. I think there was already in 2014 a a kind of positive, optimistic view about it, but there was also a bit of uncertainty what this would be actually good for. And I think that has changed in the meanwhile. So what you can see here is that more institutions use it or want to use it for widening access, lifelong learning. And this is the purpose here of our discussions today. We can also see how there was expectations, or there are expectations towards what it would do to internationalization. So you can see here, looking back at the institutions, 64% of institutions say that it contributed the digital approaches contributed to transform their interinstitutional collaboration. And they all, and 85% expect that to happen in the next 5 years. And similarly, institutions confirmed that it was really helpful to reach out to international students. So that's 57%, a bit more than half. But for the next 5 years, 86% expect that this would help them to reach out to international students. A question that we asked for the first time, it was simply not relevant in 2014, but in 2020, it was of course very relevant. We asked them about virtual student mobility. And as you can see here, 25% said that they had it in place, but there was a higher number, 40%, which said that they plan to implement that in very soon time. Just very quickly going through that, generally, there was a high agreement on that digital learning and teaching has some positive impacts, like it helps to innovate teaching, it helps to get some flexible provision, and it also, there you see the agreement is already a bit lower, it's only 35%. They say they get some data on student learning, which they find useful. Other purposes were not confirmed, like for example, it helps to get more collaboration between teachers, or it gives teachers sufficiently more time to dedicate to individual students. But on these 3 points, we had very high agreement. And despite the crisis and the difficult situation, generally there was also the feeling that digitally enhanced learning can bring benefits to the student experience, and also that the majority, if not all, students and staff have a positive attitude, a principally positive attitude towards it. I think that's also a change compared to 2014, as Daniel talked about resistance. I think people are much more, already before the crisis, they were a bit more at ease on this digital learning. They understood probably that this does not change their institutional way of learning and teaching overnight, but that this is a gradual change and that there might be some real benefits. One point that was experienced that in the crisis in particular is that the resources that are in place are simply insufficient, at least if you are put into the stress test of a complete lockdown at an institution and have to do everything online. So if you ask institutions, they would tell you that 90% would tell you that they provide digital library access, but then what you can see here is that 65% of this 90% confirmed that they had to enhance it due to the crisis. It was simply not enough for all the students and all the staff. An important question is basically, and that was also something that I think came out in Daniel's presentation, how do you move forward for that? I mean, how do you bring it forward? And I think I can echo here some of the points that he made. So of course there is resistance and there's uncertainty, but what we can see here when we asked institutions for the top 3 enablers and the barriers, what came out as number 1 was proactive participation of students and staff. Or turn it the other way around, you're bound to fail with whatever you do at your institution if you don't involve them. Of course, you can't involve them in all the decision making and not at every part of your digital learning and teaching strategy, but give them a role, consult them, and involve them proactively in some of the activities that helps to diminish the resistance. Another important point is obviously staff resources and training, also addressed by Daniel. And then, of course, funding. And what was really interesting, and I think the crisis has emphasized that, to have about a strategy big change to 2014, as I said before. More institutions had a strategy, and we got quite a few anecdotal evidence also from them. So institutions wrote to us and said, we had just developed our strategies, and then the COVID crisis started, and it was very, very useful for us in order to maneuver through that. If you ask them about what would help you in your situation to change things, to go forward, so the first, and that relates actually to the point that I made of participation of students and staff, the first point that comes up is peer learning. So exchange within the institution, bring stuff together, very much like you did it in your focus group. Let's exchange about it and learn from each other. And then also national and international training. And I think the last 2 points here that are probably will be very important for you. It is confirmed that institutional data is important. So not only the data that you gather at systems level or at regional level, but individual institutions, they need this data to reflect on their situation and where to go next, and of course also to benchmark. And then the last point here is exchanges and collaboration organized by rectors' conferences, university associations, and networks. So these are really the things that institutions believe that can help them forward. I'm trying to think a little bit into what are the immediate and but also the post-crisis impacts and consequences of this. So what we can see is that the crisis has really activated many of the strategies, structures, and capacities for digital learning that were already existent, but that were not used by everybody in the institution. We have data that in individual systems, 70% of the teachers pre-crisis, of the professors pre-crisis, had not used digitally enhanced learning. They never taught online. Well, by now they have. So a lot was about joining the dots, but then also an innovation. And that also brought into motion a reflection on the role and also on the activities of the universities. So I just point out here some issues like that learning is really a social experience, that you need people and not only materials, not only books or online content for it, but you need your peers to learn. And also the whole issue of a contribution to society and the importance of mobility and interinstitutional collaboration for what we are doing. You feel all this much more when it is suddenly brought to a stop and you have to think on how to organize it by other ways. And of course, resilience strategies. The big question is, and everybody is looking these days into the crystal ball, how do we go post-crisis? What I can say, and we just recently talked to rectors, to our members, and we got actually a kind of positive feedback from them. So despite all the challenges that Oscar and Daniel and others have emphasized, there's actually the feeling it has brought some positive change to institutions, and there's appetite to move forward from that. So have more comprehensive approaches in the future, hybrid, high flex, however you would call them. That's on the one hand side. On the other hand, we can also see that in particular at the moment, there's a lot of digital fatigue among staff and students. And what we also can see, there is a risk, not in the immediate, but post-crisis, of financial cuts. Yeah, I post that here. I show that on the right-hand side. You can see that if you ask institutional leadership what they would need, there's a clear need for investing in infrastructure and staff training, also in physical infrastructure. But it's doubtful on whether we will have the funds to do that in the future. Probably I just quickly give you an example on how we think it can be taken forward. We just conducted a new survey, which was not on digital, but on greening. So the contribution of institutions to the Sustainable Development Goals and to environmental sustainability. And these are the results. And as you can see that about one third of institutions have made digital tools for teleworking, teleconferencing, and virtual mobility. And teleworking as such, and hybrid conferencing is standard now. That's about 1/3 of institutions. This is data that we raised in April, May this year. I think if we would have asked the same question a year or 2 years ago, we wouldn't have got this data. And similar for virtual mobility, which is seen not only as a complement, but in some cases also as a replacement for some of the physical mobility of staff and students. That brings me to the end here, basically an outlook on how we try to take it forward. So definitely digitally enhanced learning will change the way on how we collaborate and exchange internationally. It will also change the way how learning and teaching works and many of the other things that institutions do. I think we should have a closer look and try to carve out what is the real added value of this digitally enhanced learning and teaching, because at the moment we have a situation where everybody just wants to go back to campus. So let's have a look at what is the real added value there. And I just showed some of this here. One is definitely for lifelong learning. So among the few people who were really happy with the situation of the lockdown and not being able or being forced to do everything online, where people who are actually lifelong learners and who feel free from the burden to go to physically to places once or twice a week. For them, that was a good situation. So that's clearly one of the purposes that we would want to highlight. And then another one, and this is really bound to internationalization, global exchanges, is that we have seen also in the crisis how important health is, but also the whole discussion on the sustainable development and that we as universities are probably in a prime position to explore that not only in our national systems, but also internationally, and that we will not be able to do that as we have done it probably mainly in the past by flying to each other's places and meeting physically, but we will also have to do that through online and virtual, through synchronous and asynchronous work. And all this, I think, will play into the transformation of institutions. So universities will change, but I think it's in our hands to direct that and guide that, not just let that happen in an arbitrary manner. So I think we have to do that in consideration of the values and of the goals and the work that we have to do for the public good. So that's what I wanted to do here. There is a quote here from the European Commissioner, Maria Gabriel. This is about the minister, if you want, for education and research in Europe, who just confirms that Europe's future, it's about the recovery after the crisis, that this is linked to green and digital transitions, and that this will also influence or impact the way of how, not only how we work in Europe, but also how European international exchanges will look like. So this will also go into the Erasmus program or the Horizon program for international collaboration. And if you are interested in how we put all this together, you can read this in our strategy, the Universities Without Walls, a vision for 2030. It will probably bring you no big surprises, but it tries to bring people to bring things into a context and try to add the dots and make that a kind of strategy for the sector for the next 10 years to come. That's from my side. And once again, thanks for the invitation and also for the inspiring contributions here this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your comments and for the presentation on the situation in Europe and of the work that the EUA is conducting on the topic. Two very quick reactions before giving the floor to Ms. Hamilton and to try to see how the situation is in the Caribbean, or the Caribbean perspective. The first one is that I am very happy, and I think this was one of the intentions of this meeting, to try to push for a content-oriented interregional approach on the discussion. So some of the data you have been showing and some of the issues that you have been reflecting on regarding the European situation open an avenue of dialogue and comparison with the situation in South America that I think can be extremely important for South American universities. And the second point is regarding the work that you have been doing and conducting at TUA on data collection and analysis of that data. All that is a sort of exercise that, as you know very well, we have started many years ago and has been stopped somehow, and probably EUA's experience in systematizing, let's say, the approach to collecting data from institutions is something that will be very important for South America and Latin America in general. Unless Daniel has something urgent to say, I will, in order to try to keep the time, I will pass the floor to Ms. Hamilton. Ms. Hamilton represents here the Ministry of Education of Jamaica. We have been inviting the colleagues from Jamaica in order to try to have a vision from the Caribbean on the problems of internationalization of curricula and digitalization. And let me say and thank publicly the Ministry of Education of Argentina, who has been also supporting us in contacting the colleagues in Jamaica. So Ms. Hamilton, welcome, and thank you very much for participating. Your reactions and comments on Daniel's presentation or Michael's presentations are welcome, and we are willing to understand or know a bit more how Jamaica and the Caribbean are dealing with two problems or issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In all fairness, I must explain that my response will have to be limited to that aspect that I was able to gather from reading the presentation, simply because of the modality in which it was being shared. I noticed, though, from just listening to the previous discussions, as well as summarizing what would have been highlighted by way of the presentation, some similarities in terms of approaches, as well as some of the issues. I think it would be important for me to identify, to start out with a key issue, which has to do with definition. So I'm not too sure what the definition is that you would have presented, but in terms of interacting with others, the literature and all of that, I was identifying an issue relative to what do we really mean by, internationalization of the curriculum. And I noticed too that a lot of emphasis would have been placed on higher education. But in giving voice to what's happening in terms of Jamaica and pulling from insights from your presentation, I must say that in our context, for example, we would have designed our curriculum bearing in mind that need for intercultural competencies to be developed in our students. Now, in observing how we have gone about implementing curriculum, we would have noticed that a lot of our activities would have resulted in what I would call some incidentals. So we're seeing where our learners are being exposed by way of the design of the curriculum, based on the spiraling of the curriculum and the fact that we would have integrated in our design an emphasis on culture and not just limiting our students' exposure to content in the context of the local setting, but also paying attention to the global arena. This is relative to making use of implementation of our curriculum. Would speak to that collaborative approach. So what we have done in the context, again, locally, is to be promoting a collaborative approach to curriculum implementation. And because in designing the curriculum, we would have adopted, this kind of consultation where we have various stakeholder groups participating. We have, for example, brought on board international consultants. We have made use of international perspectives, where we actually pulled on international persons in research and in terms of curriculum interest to give us feedback for us to see what adjustments, changes we would have had to make. Relative to digitization, however, we have also made use of the support of our international partners. So from time to time, we will have persons who would have come on board to say, we're interested in supporting what you're doing in education in Jamaica. So based on the COVID reality, we would have had to make use of the internet a whole lot, and we had support from our local stakeholders. We also had training support from international persons. We also had persons coming on board to offer suggested resources. But again, it meant looking again to see consistency with the design of our local curriculum. So another issue that I want to put on the table just quickly has to do with the philosophy that we would have embraced. So if we're moving forward to say, okay, we want to make sure that we're digitizing the content, we're making sure that our students are able to interact in an online space, we will have to revisit the philosophy upon which we base the curriculum. We have observed that once we integrate, for example, constructivist ideas with a lot of it in terms of sacred humanism, to help to complement the curriculum, we're seeing that persons tend to adopt a kind of approach that will be more inclusive. So in a nutshell, how we implement our curriculum, taking that more collaborative approach is important. How we are digitizing to include the contribution of our international stakeholders as well as our local stakeholders will be informed again by the philosophy of our curriculum, giving everybody a voice. Policies would have been adjusted, and in terms of our policy for implementation, we have actually made use of what we call curriculum implementation teams. And on that team, we have various stakeholder groups being represented: parents, school personnel, students, members of the public, and so on. Their voices would have been heard in terms of making decisions about how to do, what to do, and how we'd actually go about monitoring.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hamilton, for your reflections and presentation. It's very interesting to see, to know how you are seeing the issues from America, and probably even if we can't make the approach extensive to the whole Caribbean, the Caribbean region is a broad and wide, it's a very plural region. I think some of the issues that you are mentioning probably are equivalent in other Caribbean realities. Now, in order to close with this long round of comments from different regions, where the intention is to try to see the different realities in different regions, let me introduce my friend and colleague, Francisco Allarcon. Francisco Allarcon is the academic director of the Central American Council of Higher Education, of university, sorry, the Higher Council of Central American Higher Council of Universities. So many acronyms are destroying my brain. The interesting issue about CESUCA is that they are a regional association, a CUA. So they represent not one country, but a region, many countries. This probably will give us the presentation, as Michael's presentation gave us, a regional approach on the situation and needs in Central America. Francisco, welcome. Thank you once again for being here with us. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Nicolás.
Thank you so much, Nicolás, for your introduction and for the opportunity that you are giving me. I will make the most of this time to greet all these friends that I hadn't seen for such a long time, like Michael Gebel, Julia Tyler, and our dear friend, Colucci. It's a great opportunity to be sharing this space with Oscar Dominguez. I really appreciate the invitation that you've done and the opportunity to talk and to share my opinions as well. My first reaction to the presentation made by Daniel the presentation made implies that I will have to congratulate everyone and that it will be great, and it is great to share this study with all of us. This gives us more hope for what we can do in the future and to focus more globally about the internationalization of the curriculum, the internationalization of the internationalization and digitalization of the curriculum are very important for all of us. So let me tell you how we can start addressing this topic.
Remember that we are a collection of small countries. So it used to be bigger and bigger. We were seeing this. So we started to see that our graduates needed and will need to develop those specific competencies that will allow them to successfully exert their profession in these international contexts. The knowledge of the language, intercultural abilities, information of context, and of course, the references in the internationally. Now, before the pandemic, it was already evident that for university graduates in Latin America, the communication and international collaboration in the workplace was something that was appearing more and more. And in most of the companies, a high percentage of the companies, we could see that people were coming from other countries and cultures. And in the current workplace, having the ability to show respect for others is more and more appreciated. Trusting others, being able to work in teams with very diverse people, ethnically, linguistically, culturally diverse environments. Institutions place more and more value on people who are able to work with colleagues, with clients from different groups and cultures, from different nationalities, to communicate efficiently, building fruitful relationships with people, regardless of their origin, their identities, and their location. We understand that the difference of these groups is that they need international experiences, intercultural experiences in these process in university, international mobility, the visits, the exchanges, the international internships, the studies abroad, receiving visiting professors, visiting students. This has all been traditionally the main way to provide these experiences in higher education around the world. Different studies show, and you know this very well, that university graduates who have studied abroad or who have participated in international mobility courses during their training have greater intercultural competencies and are more employable than those who have not. Unfortunately, because of the high cost of this, international mobility has been a real option for only a small part of the university population of the entire world, and especially in our region. I was looking at a study that was published a few years ago, and even in societies that are rich as the US, it is estimated that only 1 out of 10 university studies students have had academic experiences abroad while being undergraduates. 1 out of 10. Then in Latin America, only 5% of students have the opportunity to study abroad every year. And this is actual evidence. And even though we don't have statistics for Central America. In our experience, the percentage of students who are able to study abroad as part of their training university process can be much lower than the average in Latin America, probably very close to 1%, which is the data that was currently given to us by the director in UNESCO. Unfortunately, in the public universities of Central America, we have had no resources to fund this international mobility. We don't have it in the budget of our institutions, and of course, families cannot afford it. So international mobility has always been and will continue to be for a very small elite. So the internationalization of the curriculum and the internationalization at home, even before the pandemic of COVID-19, was already being seen as a realistic option that might allow Central American universities to offer the great majority of their students some global intercultural experiences for learning. Now, if before international mobility was an option for only one minority of Central American students, of course, this situation will be worsened in the future during and after the pandemic of COVID-19. With more restricted physical mobility and greater limitations and economical restraints in every country. So international academic mobility has not been and does not seem to be a real option in the future for the greater majority of university students in Central America. But as many experts have said, the pandemic crisis could also be a positive influence for the development of internationalization from other perspectives or realities. As we all know, the pandemic has forced universities around the world to go digital from the physical campuses to the virtual campuses. Hundreds of millions of students, researchers, officials, and teachers are now working from home through their screens, their keyboards, and thanks to the numerous platforms, tools, and digital resources that are available right now. So this collective change, this generalized change in educational practices by universities is bringing about cultural changes that I think that will last even after we overcome the pandemic. And I think that these practices are closing the physical gaps brought about by the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Oceans. So they don't seem as far away. I mean, the technology is bridging these gaps. Thanks to remote communication, the distance that separates a professor from their students who live in the city of Guatemala, where I live, equals the distance that separates them from another teacher and their students who live in Barcelona or Montevideo or any other city in the world. So this change in collective practices in universities, I think it has the potential to give us a broader, more diverse exchange and collaboration in higher education around the world. I think we are all experiencing this in our own jobs. And also, I would like to tell you about another kind of potential that I see in digitalization and the virtualization we are studying in these presentations. Not so long ago, there was a national work market that was very closed, and that restricted the international mobility through visas and residency permits and all kinds of things. We also had national educational systems that did the same thing. They restricted mobility with blocking the validation of academic credentials like diplomas and different training certificates. And these practices come from a world and a society that I think that it's starting to vanish. And I don't think it has much to do with the foreseeable future or the transformations that societies are seeing in the 21st century. In several job markets, we are seeing the disappearance of transnational borders because companies are starting to hire talent wherever that may be. And thanks to telework or remote work, they don't need the talented people they hire to travel physically through borders to their headquarters. Thanks to the major progress in the digital world, in telecommunications and the internet, a company in Brussels, in Berlin, San Francisco, or Sao Paulo can hire talented, competent people working for them from Buenos Aires, from Athens, from Tegucigalpa, Guatemala City, or wherever, or vice versa. I think that in the future, the restrictions for the work traveling of people will not make as much sense and in the future. So, and the same thing is going on in the world of education. The opportunities for learning outside classrooms and formal traditional institutions has grown a lot in the past few years, both in number and in quality. The specialized information, educational resources, and learning tools that now are online have thrived and now can be accessed by everyone. The transformational processes of institutions when it comes to the digital world have become accelerated within the framework of this pandemic, as we saw in the statistics presented, especially by Michael. And this is going on all over the world. We are living in a time where through the internet, there's a growing abundance of availability and specialized information, knowledge, and more opportunities for people to learn online classes with the MOOCs that he was presenting, or maybe open educational resources, simulations, data, and satellite images, different kinds of documents. And thanks to open science, now we even can access essays and scientific papers. So now we can learn anywhere, whenever, and not only within the four walls of a university. So we might expect for these trends to push the institutional systems of higher education to be more and more open and able to provide and acknowledge learning wherever it may take place by providing access to the resources and learning opportunities that occur outside institutions in a formal, in a structured way that is more personalized or customized. I think that in the next few years, we will be seeing a better integration of formal learning and informal learning that occurs outside educational institutions, at least the traditional ones. So the virtualization of the curricula and their implementation could be wonderful for this trend. I think that if people in Central America cannot send our students massively to the world, maybe we will be able to bring the world to our own classrooms through the internationalization of the curriculum, the internationalization strategies, and virtualization as the strategies that were presented here. After listening to the presentations, I think that apart from the studies to identify trends like the ones you presented, maybe we could also explore the possibility of collaborative processes with some programs from similar backgrounds in different universities and in countries and regions. People who want to would like to work together in projects for the modification of their curriculum to focus on the structure of the curriculum, the profile of the graduates, trying to improve the intercultural and international dimensions of it. All of these when it comes to the educational aspects in order to enrichen the learning of the students and taking advantage of the possibilities and features of global citizens. So finally, to wrap up, I would like to say that I was at the beginning of this forum, you were saying that you are organizing workshops and on international collaborative training. And maybe we could explore the possibility of having these kinds of activities also for Central American universities. So, of course, we are interested, we are available to collaborate with all of you and to explore other joint projects oriented at improving the curriculum, making it more international, more digital, with the South American chapter of Obreal, like the ones you shared in today's presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for your comments. And indeed, we can think of creating some workshops with your chapter of Obreal. So that was the idea of precisely of this webinar, to inspire dialogue, multi-regional dialogue, not only because saying regional doesn't only imply Latin America, Europe, it also implies South America, Central America, North America. Those three parts, all the different parts of the Americas, can also create a great dialogue that should not be taken for granted. So the work that Obreal is doing, this interregional articulation, also brings more opportunities for dialogue and for articulations. So thank you indeed for your comments, and thank you for sharing your vision of the reality in Central America that also shares some of the challenges that we saw before. So we are trying to stick to time. We only have 7 minutes left. So I would like to ask maybe the interpreters if you could stay for 10 minutes more, if we can stay 10 extra minutes, because I would love to do one thing. First of all, to address the questions that were posed by the participants in the Q&A. There are 2 or 3 questions. Some of them were answered as we moved on. Some of them were greetings, but the 2 questions are basically for Daniel's presentation about the data that were collected in South America. One of them is more methodological, that is to say, the representativity of the sample, and the second is about the challenge of languages, that is to say, the language challenge, which was whether it was specific for one sector or if it had an impact on everyone. So I will give the floor to you, Danielle, so that you can answer these questions, and then maybe to see if anyone else wants to answer or to add something. And then I will finally open up the floor for any final comments or remarks by all or any participant. Please try to be very brief. Yes, 3 minutes, I promise. So from the methodological point of view, the question is, okay, representative how representative the sample was. There are different ways to analyze this. We tried to capture as much variability as possible. So whether it is representative or not, there are some metrics that can show this, that is to say, show the capacity or the scope of this sample. Institutions from many countries, as it was seen in one of the charts that I showed, had similarities in the content. So the focus groups had used the same template, but they were independent. So a lot of institutions mentioned the same words or the same groups of qualitative words. On the other hand, the work conducted by Michael showing the results, there's a lot of convergence there, you know. They used a different methodology, or let's call it, the methodology is more based on surveys, on the questionnaires. In our case, we are more focused or based on the focus groups. So two different methodologies, but they converge in terms of the results that were observed. So that reinforces the idea that the sample made in South America by means of the focus groups is representative. So that's first answer. Now, in terms of languages, there is a perspective that in Latin America or in these higher education institutions, there is a lack of training or teaching foreign languages. English, but not only English, Portuguese, for example, which is very important for us in South America, and we need to go deeper into these trainings or teachings. However, that goes against the language governance or that we need to have. That is to say, students need to keep their own languages and try to understand each other in a diversity of languages. So what actually goes beyond what we saw of the findings and all the interviews is the need to increase the language courses in different areas of higher education. I forgot to say that I want to thank Marina Larrea for her contribution and the creation of my presentation for today, which was something important. Something that Francisco was saying, he mentioned the need for some actions that come up after the other presentations as well. So there is convergence in those needs that were mentioned as well. It's not only from Central America and the Caribbean, but we also have those same needs. Thank you, Daniel, for these comments. Do you have any comments, Álvaro, Michael, Francisco, or Miss Hamilton? If you want to say anything, go ahead and take the floor. If there are no further comments, okay, so if there are no further comments, I would like then to wrap up by thanking all of you. Michael, actually, if you want, because I see you writing on the chat, but the chat cannot be seen or read by the participants. It's only us.
Okay.
So if it's important data, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to underline what Daniel just said. There is actually a lot of convergence in what we see happening at the moment. Obviously, this socioeconomic situation is different in different parts of the world. And I just highlighted here that the IAU, the International Association of Universities, has conducted a first survey on COVID impact, which we helped to promote. Actually, we didn't publish or we didn't conduct a European survey. We support the IAU surveys, and the second survey has just been closed and will be published in the autumn, and will be a third one in 2022. And I think this is a great way of doing what Francesco just said, to cluster around this joint exchanges and joint work on these issues that concern us, of course, all, and where we find a lot of commonalities, but also some differences. I found it really inspiring what Francesco just said about the perspectives that there are for working jointly for the, I would say, for the global public good and really live up to the potential that universities actually have in engaging and in collaborating internationally. And I think I just don't want to sound too negative, but this would also give us a good way to counter and minimize the potential negative impact that this could come. I mean, be it from fraud, whatsoever, exploitation, data trade, and. So I think we are really put into a position where it is important that we collaborate more internationally and do that more. We have done that in the past, but there's now a chance to do that much more in a much more fluid and systematic way than in the past. That's all from me. Thanks.
Muchas gracias, Michael, por el
Thank you, Michael, indeed. Thank you for your words. Thanks for this conclusion. You're actually advancing my own words, because I wanted to say almost the same. What was said from the beginning by Alvaro, Daniel, Oscar. I think that there are three elements that I would like to mention just to wrap up. The goals that the South American chapter of OBRIAL had set for this webinar in particular, that were to analyze the role of the universities, the universities associations, to try to get a first approach, an inter-regional approach that will enable us to have common projects or a convergence with this idea of interregionality in mind, and to show humbly to show some results of the focus groups, which are of course not the last ones that will be conducted, of course not, but this webinar has actually met all the and actually gone beyond all our expectations. First of all, as Michael well said, there is a lot of convergence in our visions and the potentiality or the possibility to continue working together. Not only from a methodological point of view, it is very important to share our knowledge, but also to share data and to share the way in which to create and to collect those data. That makes our institutions stronger, and that makes the councils and the associations stronger and more important, not only in South America, but also in the Caribbean and with our international partners. Francisco, there have been already some answers to your proposal of creating not only this interregional logic of sharing policies or thinking about these policies in a more general way, but also colleagues from Cruzana University from Mexico. They're chatting with me on the WhatsApp and then on the chat box, and they are saying that evidently, if the OBRIAL South American university associations can make a general call for workshops to create more capacities in South America, that they would be definitely willing to participate and to help or even to develop those workshops. And I'm sure that as soon as we do that, other universities, even in Europe or in other regions, they will be willing to support us, to support this initiative of Central America as well. So creating capacities at a regional level, advancing on the possibilities to continue creating debates from an inter-regional perspective with topics that address the whole of higher education and the role of the university associations and councils, with the role of articulating data and creating the possibility to develop new policies. So I think that if we all agree with that, I think that the webinar has been quite successful indeed. So I would like to thank all of you again for participating from Brussels, from Guatemala, from Bogota, Barcelona, Jamaica. I would like to thank the almost 250 participants that were connected here. I would like to thank all the interpreters, and I would like to invite you to the second round of discussion for internationalization that will take place on June the 11th, where the Indian Association of Universities will take part, the universities of the South of Africa, and FAUBAI, which is the Brazilian Association for Internationalization of Education, to continue with this dialogue and to continue sharing the challenges of internationalization. So again, it will take place on June the 11th. Oh, I'm sorry, and there was this, the EUA is going to participate as well, to give the European perspective of the challenges and what lies ahead in terms of internalization of the curriculum. Thank you all again for your participation, and then you're all invited to share the next presentations with us. All the PowerPoints and the presentations are available for you to access them on our website. And when we have the final document of the what Danielle's team is conducting, we are going to share that as well with all the participants. It's going to be a public document, so we hope that that can be useful for further discussions and talks with Central America and with Europe, as Michael and Francisco said. Once again, thank you all very much. See you next time.
Gracias, hasta pronto.